everyone. Welcome to NYFA Photos guest speaker series. We have Oliver Wasow with us today, and we are thrilled to have him here. Over the last 35 years, Oliver Wasow's work has been engaged with a variety of concerns central to contemporary photographic discourse. Issues of photographic veracity, the cultural production of spectacle, post-production practice, questions of authorship and ownership, and the ways in which science is depicted in visual culture have all been a consistent part of his artistic practice. However, while engaged with these critical issues, Wasow's work has always been equally concerned with things more mysterious and personal. His images, influenced by popular culture, fine art, and vernacular photography alike, employ a personal and compelling iconography that is often run through the genres of landscape, still life, and portraiture. Photos are lies, he says. The lie is that a photo is a memory reified, when in fact it is a memory in a holding pattern, and its next step is oblivion. It's no wonder that he has recently turned to photography's brand new tool, AI, creating images that are majestically stunning as well as haunting. Welcome, Oliver.
Hi.
Hey.
I can be seen, yes?
Yes, you are
okay.
seen.
Well, it's a little strange for me because I'm talking, but I'm not seeing anyone, which I guess that's how it's going to be, correct? But you all are out there. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you, Nancy. That was honestly one of the nicer introductions I've had. It was very concise and summed it up. And
thank you.
It was interesting. I was thinking about this idea that photos are lies, which has sort of dominated the thinking among many artists for the last 50 years or what have you, many photographers. And I'm not so sure anymore that they're lies as much as they are one of the many truths that we have. Obviously, we live in a interesting time in relationship to the truth.
Yeah.
And before I put my images up, I just want to say, when Nancy first contacted me, she asked me to talk about AI, and it is something I'm playing with a lot, and it is something I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about a lot of other stuff too, as a way of sort of getting to the AI. And I just want to say that it's new for me, it's new for most of us. And it's never a good idea to start out from a position of defensiveness. But the one thing I have learned in my very short time playing with AI and doing a lot of research into it is I'm absolutely certain it's going to be a radical game changer. And I would ask, I guess I would just say, if you've never played with AI before, do yourself the favor and do so. It's very simple to get access to it. And it really is, it's in its infancy, so who knows what's going to happen with it. But it's very different than people tend to think it is. And a lot of the criticisms of it, are born from this idea that, well, you just say, do this, and it does it. And I'll get to that. Anyway, let me share the screen and make sure everything works here. Sorry, as Nancy said, I guess I've been doing this for 35 years now. And one of the, advantages of getting older is that it allows you to look back at your work and sort of see things as a continuum. And, what I'm going to be talking about here is going to be all kind of geared towards how what I've been doing, which is, like this image on the left, the blue sort of floating thing was done in 1982. And the image on the right was done 40 years. Am I doing my math right? Yeah, 40 years later, 2022. in AI. And to me, they're very similar, and I see a lot of the connections between them. But I kind of want to walk you through that. And in doing so, keep in mind, I'm going to be looking at a lot of work, a lot of pictures, zooming through a lot of it, and then maybe stopping on things that, are kind of more relevant than other things. So I just figured people like looking at pictures. So we'll be looking at a lot of them. All right, so, and then, hopefully in the question and answer at the end, we can talk about some of the issues that come up around AI and some of the problems people might have with it. Because it's interesting to me. I think it was the filmmaker Robert Rodriguez once wrote this great thing, and where he talked about how creative people are sort of notoriously the slowest to adopt new technologies. They always do, and they love them, but they're very entrenched because new technologies, tend to radically change the way people make, sell, distribute, look at artwork. And certainly AI is going to do that. And we saw that happen with Photoshop, obviously, and photography did it to painting, and so on. Anyway, moving on. Hopefully my advance here will work. Are you guys looking at this Dorothea Lange Cartier-Bresson picture?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I'll keep asking that. So I'm throwing these two pictures up just to quickly sort of, on a personal level, give you a context for what I wasn't interested in, and I am interested in this work, and I like it, and it, I very much appreciate it. But when I say wasn't interested in, as a young artist in New York in the late 70s, this was sort of what was presented as great photography. And a lot of what, is embodied in these two pictures was stuff that a lot of artists of my generation were reacting against. This idea of the kind of authenticity of, this woman is telling the truth about this sort of worn woman. And then, especially this idea of the decisive moment as being one of the defining aesthetic criteria for photography. I think a lot of artists of my generation saw the photograph as this very malleable thing, and in some ways maybe a starting point for making a picture is the picture itself, as opposed to the decisive moment. I'm making great generalizations here, but whoops. What I was interested in, though, was pictorialism. I was interested in photography that collapsed painting and photography that was more sort of from an earlier period, where in order to legitimize itself as art, it looked more to painting, and this dance between painting and photography is something that I've always been very interested in, which is obviously very manifest in AI, as we'll see. And just very quickly, while I was called a photographer, I've always been called a photographer. I don't know what it means to be a photographer in this day and age, but I've always been very interested in and drawn from things outside the realm of fine art. Three big influences on me were sort of this picture on the upper left is a painting by Roger Dean, who did a lot of album cover art in the 70s. The picture below that is Sid Mead's set designs for Blade Runner. Cinema's always had a big influence on me, and special effects certainly have been a huge part of my interest in photography. There's a painting by Chesley Bonestell on the right, this kind of apocalyptic pulp fiction, science fiction, book cover kind of stuff that has always interested me. All of these in some ways embody the idea of the sublime, and the sublime, which is that sort of space between beauty and terror, I guess, has traditionally been located in nature, but I think in the 20th century, it's more of a kind of technological sublime. And that's something that interests me. I'll talk more about later. Big other big influences on me back then in the 80s were advertising. These are two advertisements from magazines. I spent a lot of time looking at magazines. Keep in mind, this is all before, the internet or Google. I was interested in advertising at that time that used photography, but used special effects. I guess there's the first kind of digital imaging happened with the Cytex machines at that time. And I was really loved the way, these photographs kind of use the photograph as a way to kind of suggest the truth. They're not paintings, but we're very transcendent of time and place and all the things that we usually associate with photography. I just arbitrarily grabbed these two pictures off the web today of ads from the 80s, but I spent a lot of time looking at magazines, and I spent a whole lot of time, as did a lot of other artists, I think, of my generation, in the New York Public Library's picture library. Up above, this is on the left, you can see a file cabinets. They were just rows after rows of images in folders. That's one of the folders opened up with images laid out. And, I would just go there and spend hours every day. And I was really fascinated and loved the way images were put into, it was this archive, but they were categorized in certain ways. I was really interested in the kind of typologies that were created. And in particular, one of the folders that I returned to a lot were UFO pictures, which you can see 3 of them on the bottom here. I've always had a real fascination with UFOs because at that time, before Photoshop, and when people had more of a belief in photography, they were this kind of the embodiment of photographs that questioned the veracity of the photograph. And there were special effects and they were kitschy. I was always interested in that. So I and just the idea of the floating object interested me a lot. So in the early 80s, what you're looking at here on the far right there, that long vertical strip is a photograph of mine. It was maybe 30 inches tall, a Cibachrome photograph framed. And what you're looking at on the left are just some source pictures I used to make it. I was very interested in the idea of rephotography, as a lot of photographers were at that time. I was less interested in appropriation as a way of questioning authorship and originality, though those things certainly interest me and come up a lot in AI, as we'll see. But I was more interested in just finding these little areas in the picture and using them. So if you look at these bushes right here, you'll see that, those are in the back of this. These spires right here are in the spires down here. And this, whatever this, little icon of science is, I rephotographed and manipulated in order to make this. And then I used a lot of homemade special effects. This is all before Photoshop, to seam them together. So I show you these just as a way of, oh dear, I hope I didn't just activate my slideshow, as a way of, showing you how these things were made, sort of. I mean, again, there's a lot of other pictures involved in this, in the making of these 2 images on the top. But here you can see this background in this grape nuts ad, this landscape, which then shows up here and in here. So I was really interested in this kind of idea of zooming in on these pictures and creating images. So in short, I was more interested in making pictures than in taking pictures. And again, this is before Photoshop. So these are just 2 of dozens. Stop it. Know how to turn this thing off. Oh well, hopefully I won't keep wrestling with this, but so when I showed these pictures, I often did large prints of them, but I also did these small sort of 5x7 prints in installations where I would have, in this case, there's only 20 of them, but sometimes there'd be as many as 50 of these pictures hung on a wall in these thick frames. Not sure how to keep this turned off. At some point, I stopped working with these kind of pictures of floating objects and abstract space and worked more with unified images. This is a picture of mine on the left. I include the picture on the right because I was also very drawn to, and continue to be drawn to, romantic landscape painting, and really love the kind of tropes of romanticism where you've got this overhanging tree, and this idea of historical transcendence and nature as a location of the sublime. And again, I was more interested in the sort of technology as a place of sublime. So here's a couple of other pictures from around that period. There's also this idea of using color as a really kind of saturated, overly, this is not, your grandfather's black and white photography. It was really sort of a way of addressing the artifice and saccharine nature of color, or the spectacle of color. And then Photoshop came along in the early 90s and sort of changed everything. This is a picture I made when I first started using Photoshop. And, when I look back on my work now, I realize that in many ways, while Photoshop was a real blessing to me, it was great. It also, I think, I really got very Baroque with it because I could and had a lot of fun, but it undercut the audience's expectations of what a photograph was. And so when the audience stopped expecting a photograph to be something real, I think a lot of this sort of critical power of what I was doing was taken away from me. And I, in some ways, maybe just got more interested in just really what are basically making these paintings. These are fairly large Cibachrome prints, by the way. And they're made from photographs I've taken. They're made from photographs I found, and they're collaged seamlessly in Photoshop into one image. So here you can see this is a large backdrop for movies that I took at Universal Studios in Los Angeles. This is a Thomas Cole painting of a Kotterskill Falls. This is a waterfall photograph I took in Hawaii, and they're all kind of seamed together. Some of the images, this one, at this time, I became more interested in pictures that really could be believable, where the space was not as painterly in some ways. And then I started doing these interiors where I brought the landscape indoors, and did a lot of those. And at some point in the early 2000s, I started really becoming interested in the idea of looking to the past as much as the future. I mean, in some ways, my work has always been about this idea of a kind of nostalgia for the future. And I started looking at this guy, Wallace Nutting, and I could go on for hours about him, and I won't, but he hand-colored pictures in the early 20th century, and he had these women who hand-colored them. He had a factory called Nuttingham, and he made a ton of money selling these pictures in something he called the expansible catalog, and a catalog in Woolworths and Five and Dimes. Everybody bought them for like $1, and they were all originally signed by Nutting. And one of the things that, here you can see the signature at the bottom, and one of the things that interested me about this was that he was like marketing nostalgia. The pictures were always like these 19th century women or cherry blossoms in nature. using the most cutting edge technology. And he was also using the mass produced capabilities of photography, but applying the uniqueness of painting to them in the most sort of fast factory mass produced way. And it seemed like this interesting sort of paradox. And I also loved that he was making work that was accessible. It was, sort of it was a populist impulse, even if he was marketing nostalgia. It interested me, and it struck me that digital imaging had a lot in common with this, in that there was the potential to make a lot of work, print it cheaply. We had archival printers by this time. So I decided to set up a website called the Expansible Catalog. I just had kids, and I young kids in the house, and I wanted a way to make fast work and make a lot of it. And so I tried doing this project where I made a lot of work, sold it online. I also did exhibitions where I would frame them in these unique frames and show them. And here you can see I did a book as well, my own catalog. Tried selling them online in big editions for very cheap. Interestingly, people weren't that interested in that. I think people want to spend more money for a picture, paradoxically. It's anyway, I digress into that, but it was a learning experience. And here's some of the pictures that I made doing that project, just a few of them. I just want to quickly stop on this picture for a second, because there's an interesting anecdote about this picture that I think is in some ways prescient of some of the pragmatic issues that come up around AI, that AI introduces, we'll talk about in a minute, but some of the issues that come up for illustrators and other commercial artists and just artists in general. Anyway, I made this picture. So the editor of Popular Mechanics magazine saw it, and she really loved it, and she wanted to put it on the cover of an issue they were doing about UFOs. And I said, great. She asked me to send her a high resolution image. Then she got back to me and said, do you have a better quality picture? Because this looks really, really low res. And I said that I didn't, because I made the picture. It's meant to look low res. That's the aesthetic of it. And she said, well, we can't use it because people just think it's a bad reproduction. So I tried to go in there and, interpolate it and fix it. And she wasn't going to have it. And I was disappointed because I really wanted to do the cover of Popular Mechanics, and it paid well. And then interestingly, she got back to me after she told me they couldn't use it a week later, and she suggested that they have their in-house person remake it, and I would still get paid. These are the 3 images I used to make it, or 2 images. This is, I think, from the Iraq War. This is a photo I took of a cornfield, and I just kind of put them together and did some work on them in Photoshop. This is the cover. That's my image on the right. So they had their in-house person using some graphics program, I don't know, stock photo and CGI or something, remake the picture, gave me credit, strangely. Even I asked them to also give the person who made the picture credit, but I don't think that person was paid nearly as well as I did, which is very strange. So basically what I was paid for was the idea, which is, again, what I think comes up again later. Maybe we can talk about that with AI. Around 2000 or so, I started collecting photographs, buying vernacular found snapshots. And I now have many, many thousands of them, and I've focused on a specific kind of picture. But at that time, I was more interested in just in general in vernacular photography. And one of the reasons I did that, and I like the sort of democratic idea of things that weren't meant to be art, are art. The authorlessness of it really appealed to me. The intentionality or the lack of intentionality, the fact that the kind of it's the collector in some ways, or the person who finds the image in some ways, who is assigning it off, artistic value, maybe by contextualizing it or pulling it out of the stream of pictures. Anyway, I did a show of these pictures, many hundreds of them, all printed out, scanned, printed out in different sizes, and then put into these groups sort of typologies. So you would have shadow pictures, you would have men with guns, women with guns, costumes, whatever, just many, each one of these little areas in there is a typology. And you see this video down at the end. I collaborated with somebody I'd never met before except online. His name was John Monteith, and we did a book about this project together. He collected really early digital pictures from chat rooms, and we did this book together and this exhibition together. And I really loved the idea that that we had never met, that all of our relationship was just mediated from exchanging pictures and talking online. In fact, my favorite project from this various projects we did is this thing where these are just 4 of hundreds of these, but we would take turns on the internet sending each other a picture from our collection. And then we would get that picture and we would find another picture that looked like it from our collection. And then we would pair them together. And it was just remarkable. We could always find, there's no cropping or anything, just we could always find a picture that sort of from these 2 different time periods that worked together and spoke to the same thing. So this idea of collaborating with people you don't know and using the archive to make artwork is something that has always interested me and is, I think, in many ways essential to AI also. More recently, or the last 5 years or so, I've been exclusively collecting photographs that have painted backdrops where there's some kind of painting and photography relationship, but it's it's one based really on this construct of artifice where the person is in the front and something is in the background. And I've never worked with people in my own work before, and there's a lot of reasons, I don't want to get into it, but I realized I really should and wanted to. So what I did was I looked at this work and started taking pictures of people and making my own kind of versions of these with backdrops. Though in my case, I used green screen rather than painted backdrops, which is certainly a lot easier to do. I'm just going to run through some of these from that series. This is around 2012, 2000, about 10 years ago or so, and ongoing. These are mostly friends, family. It's my mother. And so that was all going great. I was having a lot of fun doing that. And then this happened in 2016. And I got really frozen in the studio in 2016 and didn't know what to do. And I was just not feeling it at all. So one of the things I did is I did this thing called the Rogues Gallery, where I just took these people in the Trump administration, people surrounding Trump, and I found pictures of them, did some heavy manipulation on them, sort of created this gallery of rogues, this rogues gallery of these people, and sold them to raise money for the ACLU and Planned Parenthood, and just kind of, it was a very visceral sort of propagandistic impulse. It's not subtle, and I wasn't feeling that these were subtle times, and it was kind of the only response I could have. And they existed online mostly. If I made prints, it was just to raise money, and if people bought them, I assume they bought them to donate money, and I can't imagine many people hanging them on their walls. But so there's just a couple of them. And I'm going to be interested to see what happens over time with these. What when we sort of, it's like maybe with looking at a George Gross painting or something, what happens when we the people, we don't necessarily know the people anymore, but it's more just about this kind of person. So around 2017 or so, a good friend of mine who has a book publishing project called St. Lucie Books approached me, and he said, I've been thinking a lot about these three things that you have going on with your work. You've got these pictures you collect, these kind of rogues that you're working on, and then these photographs you're taking of people. And he said, would you be interested in making a book about them? So I came up with this idea of doing friends, enemies, and strangers, and published a book that allowed me to play with kind of pictures I've made, that are source material, that are incorporated into pictures I've made, and create these kind of juxtapositions. It's a very long book and I'm just showing you a few spreads from it, but that kind of represent the different kinds of approaches I took to editing this and the juxtapositions within it. So it's pictures I took, pictures I've found, and pictures I've made, pictures I collect. On the right, that's like a detail of a Fragonard that's been pretty manipulated, and this is this crazy hand-painted vernacular picture. And a lot of the images that I collect have a real sort of politic to them, that are interesting, can be contextualized in interesting ways. That guy. He's going to come up in a minute when I start talking about AI, strangely enough. This picture of my son on the right with our donkey, and on the left is something from his favorite video game, and the backdrop behind him is from that video game also. So, and this is these two guys. A few years ago, I started subscribing to these companies that create faces. And, I'm sure there's many more now, but millions and millions of faces of people who don't exist, people with no birthdays, and these are sold. They're created using AI, and they're sold to advertisers, to anybody who needs a copyright-free face. And you can, choose many different variables that you can input to get the face that you want. So obviously this really appeals to me because of this, this dance with a lot of the issues I'm interested in, certainly artifice, something being a photograph that has no referent, it's been separated from the thing that it is a picture of, but we still regard it as a photograph when in fact, and it uses photographic principles to make it, but it's for all intents and purposes, it's perhaps a painting. So one of the things I have been playing with is making, using some of these faces and melding them together with some of my found images, and creating, in this case, this kind of gang of Proud Boy sort of type people. And, again, these are people who don't exist, though they're certainly types and they're fragments of people that exist. And in this case, sort of working with creating people that might stand in some kind of opposition to the Proud Boys in this case. Is a kind of, I guess, a gender neutrality to them, and just a beauty to them also in my eyes anyway. And I started thinking a lot about, how you can create families in some ways. Like, so the figures in the foreground are from pictures I own that I bought. They're old black and white photo booth pictures. And then I used AI to kind of create these eerie people that could be related to them. And again, I would hope that when people would look at this, the backstory wouldn't be known or important. So, the idea is that there is some mystery also to these people. So yeah, so these are, you can kind of tell by the glassy eyes that these are not real people necessarily. So that brings us up to my recent kind of playing with AI. And I just, again, I want to say, and maybe I mentioned this before, but everything you're looking at here is kind of in progress, because I have not figured this stuff out yet. I don't really necessarily know what I want to do with it. I only know that I feel like it is, for me, the I feel like I've been waiting for it my whole life. So this is an image that I made inputting some text, a burning oil derrick in a field at dawn. Now, let me just say that a lot of people think, okay, you put that in and then you get the picture out. I just want to say that, there is a lot of stuff that goes on before you get the final picture that you decide to use. So for instance, the picture on the upper left is the one I use, but these are 3 different variations that one would get just putting in that same prompt. If afterward you assign a different parameters, aesthetic parameters to it, right? I think the one on the bottom I just typed in the style of Monet or something like that. But the aesthetic parameters, this is when I say I'm playing with this and learning this now, that's where for me, the real art comes into this in some ways, is that learning not only what you want to input in terms of what you're describing, but how you want the computer, the algorithm to make it. So for instance, here's just 6 different examples that I've used for creating images, and edit out any different. So these descriptions come after what it's a picture of. So these will kind of give you some control over what you're going to get. And one of the things I love, by the way, about this is the lack of control. I mean, to me, it's in some ways like, this might seem like a weird analogy, but it's like an abstract expressionist painting or something, in that you might, make your brushstroke and not know what's going to happen. And, there's a lot of happy accident stuff that happens with this. And it's a dance with control, which is something that I've always really enjoyed. And then, of course, there are the descriptions of the stuff. And that really fascinates me. It's like, I've decided I want to do a book of poetry based on people's input prompts for what they want pictures of. You can learn a lot about people looking at, because when you're making your art, I don't know if any of you ever used AI, but when you're making it, you're looking at everybody else making art at the same time, unless you pay extra not to, and not to have people look at yours. But I love that you can not only look at what people are making, you can download what they're making. You can, you can copy and paste the parameters, the aesthetic parameters they're using, and put them into yours. So it's a really collaborative environment that is all drawing from this huge archive of images on the internet, millions, if not billions of pictures out there that, we're drawing from. But here's just a few examples of stuff that people make pictures of. Dojo cat abducted by aliens, hanging upside down, long braids hairstyle. And some of them are like this one with hyper-realistic architectural section of the Azadi Tower in Tehran with people in the street celebrating. So, a lot of people were making pictures like that. There's also a kind of relationship to what's going on in the news that you see when, these morons were upset that there was an African-American mermaid, a black mermaid. You all of a sudden, you saw all these people making black mermaids, and of course, assholes making white ones as well. Anyway, Snoopy wearing a crown, 14th century art, etc. So I'll just show you some of the stuff I've been working with, and keep in mind that, I'm working with a very, or not very, but a somewhat controlled aesthetic that I am trying to get things that have, very similar to what I've always been interested in, that space between painting and photography. Back in the early 1990s, I went out to Arizona to visit this place called the Biosphere, which is this big structure that was built by these kind of strange paranoid people as a place to, it was a glass enclosed structure, maybe some of you know about it, where the idea was to grow plants and animals inside this with no air coming from the outside. It was in the desert, so the plants created their own oxygen, and it didn't really work, and the people behind it were really strange. And right before they went bankrupt, it had been turned over to Steve Bannon. Yeah, that Steve Bannon back then. And eventually Columbia University took it over, and now I guess they're getting a lot of valuable research from it. But I liked it because it was the ultimate sort of nature, culture, science fiction environment. But when I went out there to take pictures of it, they were so paranoid and weird, they wouldn't give me any kind of access to it really. And I never really liked the pictures I took at all. But one of the things AI has allowed me to do is to revisit and work on those pictures and work on the ideas. So this, I've been doing a series of pictures, based on this place out in the Arizona desert. And, this this is sort of a utopian vision. And at the same time, I've been playing around a lot with AI with its kind of dystopian visions, as I've always been interested in that also. And so these are various views of golf courses created in AI, golf courses that are on fire. Much of the stuff I've been doing recently has been kind of not just about nature culture, but specifically about environmental disaster, which is obviously on everyone's mind these days. And golf courses have always seemed like the ultimate catalyst for, or symbol for, what we're doing wrong. I've been playing around, creating images that might anticipate floods or look like floods. I mean, one of the weird things about AI is it allows you to, create photographs of future in some ways that are drawn from pictures that already exist out there, which is kind of interesting. So this is like a shelter city on a river and so forth. And again, all of these pictures come from, I've rejected, 100 pictures to get to the one that I use. And I've gone through a process when you work with AI, you're going through this constant process of doing variations on pictures until you get to what you want. You know, it's really a lengthy process, or it can be. Sometimes the best one is like the second or even the first one. I'm still really interested in this idea of, which goes way back to some of the earlier work I did with these floating objects and things that are more abstract. This idea of creating images that rest somewhere between abstraction and representation. Strangely enough, the prompt for this included the word Sputnik, which it always makes this weird shape out of the prompt Sputnik. I was trying on the image on the left, I was really trying to take Frank Lloyd Wright's falling water building and do some stuff with it. And I liked what I get. It wasn't what I wanted, but I liked it. It's something that happens a lot. And the image on the right is of a kind of video screen waterfall. Been working a lot with billboards, trying to really interesting things happen with language. When you input language, this is a Marlboro billboard and this is Mountain Dew. And I don't remember what the prompts were exactly, and I did a lot of variations on it, but it doesn't use words, it uses sort of the shapes of fonts, so it always ends up looking like Cyrillic or something. I've always been fascinated by those huge airplane cemeteries that exist in the Southwest, where they put airplanes where they won't rust out in the desert. That was an attempt to make that. And likewise, when you fly into Las Vegas and you see all of this desert, and then you've got this water that's not meant to be there, this city there. I've been playing around with trying to create grass in the desert. There's some run-of-the-mill garbage, but kind of beautiful garbage. And I guess a good picture to end on here is an image that I don't remember what the prompt was, but if you put iceberg into AI, it almost always throws the Titanic in, whether you want it to or not, which is really interesting, or some kind of a boat. But in this case, I really liked the kind of fire and ice division that I was able to get. So again, a lot of this AI stuff is, I sort of feel it's in its infancy for me and for all of us, but I certainly have a lot of thoughts about it, and I'm going to open it up now to questions, I guess. Should I stop sharing? Yes.
Great, Oliver, thank you for that. I'm going to encourage all of our listeners, please type in your questions to the Q&A panel. I'm happy to moderate that with Oliver. And I have a couple of questions for you to get us started.
Sure.
I loved seeing the early stuff that you were doing and then moving forward into where you're working with AI right now. Really, it's easy to see the correlation there, and I can see why you would progress that way. I guess one of my first questions, and since AI really is in its infancy in terms of kind of consumer or artistic use, right? Where do you see that going in terms of copyright and ownership? And what are the parameters that we may, as artists, start struggling with AI creation?
Well, I think that all new technologies disrupt the existing paradigm. And when MP3s came along, the recording industry started suing everybody. and they started taking everyone to court, and they started claiming copyright on everything. And what they were doing wasn't trying to return to the way things were. They were trying to slow things down till they figured out how they were going to make money off of it and keep things the way they were. And they did it eventually, right? You've still got the same teeny fraction of the people making money, and you've got Spotify, and they're giving music away for free basically, but they're still making lots of money. They found new ways to do it, concerts, subscription models, etc. And I bring that up because I think that there's no question, if you're a book designer, let's say, no one's gonna, people are gonna use this stuff because it is copyright free. People are gonna use this stuff, and people are gonna lose work, but other people are gonna get work. I mean, blacksmiths lost work when the car came along. It's like, it happens. And I don't mean to be, sort of flippant about it, because I think that it is, it's a problem, but it's a problem that's gonna happen. Artists are going to be drawn to this stuff. It's just too amazing, and it's too appealing. So in terms of the copyright thing, I mean, I think we live in a copyright crazy world where we're dealing with copyright laws that were written for systems that don't exist anymore. I mean, copyright laws were written to encourage people to invent things originally, right? It wasn't really meant to be used the way it's used now. I didn't show some of the pictures now, but some of the things that I originally played around with AI is I would just, I would write in, environmental disaster in the style of Norman Rockwell, and you'd get a Norman Rockwell painting of an environmental disaster, right? So certain well-known artists, their style becomes something used by this. But in terms of like, maybe I should ask you what you mean by copyright, but if a picture is made up of like teeny little fragments of lots of other pictures, that's kind of like, it's a remix, but the sources are so unknown as to be hard to enforce, I think.
Right, I guess that's true. I guess when I was asking about copyright, just the image created by AI. So,
Right.
is you as the artist, you're pulling from what you're trying to see here,
Right.
and having the AI engine build that for you, right? So
Right.
the IP essentially is yours, for example. And I'm not trying to create an argument there. It's just
No, yeah.
right? So the IP is yours. The technology is the AI company. When you're building an image from their technology, but it's your IP, and just for people listening, intellectual property is what I'm thinking about when I'm talking about IP. It's your idea, right? Where do those meet in the middle, right? And how do you then take that image that's created and show that in a gallery, sell it commercially, things like that? And I guess, as you said, it all gets reinvented as time goes on.
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to come up with that or against that pretty soon, right?
I mean, a Canon camera doesn't have any claims on the picture you take with it, right?
That's true. I feel like that's different though, because the camera itself is not the creative source. And I guess maybe that's the same thing here, right?
I guess that's why I was stressing over and over again, and trying not to be too defensive about it, but was stressing over and over again that there really is it's not just as simple as make me a picture of Dojo Cat hanging upside down. You get 50 different versions of it. And then there's a lot of control on the part of the artist put in. And I sometimes feel when people say it's just a tool, that maybe they're downplaying the importance of the tool, but it is just a tool in the sense that it's still a series of, artists have been dealing with this issue since forever. I mean, sound artists working with found images, and yes, I think the music industry in particular is kind of crazy with this stuff. They'll you can use 7 seconds of James Brown going, ow, but not 8, and this kind of crazy stuff that I think curtails creativity. But I don't know. I don't feel, in the end, people find ways to sell things. You know, NFTs, everyone talks about NFTs being a new kind of art. Well, they're not a new kind of art. They're a new way of selling art.
Mm.
And in some ways, it's an old way of selling art, in that basically what it's doing is it's finding a way to put a signature on something. You know, what's the difference between $1 million Cindy Sherman and the one that I cut out of a book and hang on my wall? It's a little CS on the back, right? I mean, otherwise they look pretty much the same.
It's a great example.
Well, it's an example because I sold my Cindy Sherman for a lot less than that many years ago and replaced it with one from a book on my wall. But yeah, so I think that this stuff will work itself out, and we are in the infancy of it. Where I have, this is too long an answer to your question, but where I have trouble is with this stuff is when a lot of people say, oh, there's not enough work put into it. There's not enough, there's an equation. We sort of have these notions, we equate labor with quality or the hand, we kind of fetishize the hand and stuff like that. But, I think this is a battle that's been photography. Baudelaire, the #1 art critic in the 19th century, hated photography. He said it wasn't an art form. We've been going through this forever.
Sure. I mean, that argument continues from analog into digital to Photoshop and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I think this is incredibly exciting because, and I feel this way about Photoshop too. If you can think it and see it here, you can make it happen, right? And interesting comment about using the tool, because yes, these are tools that we can use. The camera is a tool, Photoshop is a tool, AI is a tool. You still have to think creatively to be able to create the stuff that you're showing us. Right.
Yeah.
So,
and I see Nancy asks how much Photoshop I'm using. I would also say that in my case, very often the image that AI generates for me is I then go back in and I work on that also.
great.
So there's, it's never, that's usually not the end of it.
Okay.
Cool. It can be.
So a couple of questions have come in. One is just a hello from Stephanie Theodore, saying she's a big fan.
Hi, Stephanie.
So thank you, Stephanie.
I can't see anybody, by the way, who's out there.
And then a question from Robert. He's asking if you see ways to incorporate AI into film photography. Now, Robert, I'm assuming you mean analog and not moving image. So interesting question.
Yeah, both. I mean, first of all, let me just say, when it comes to the moving image, we're at the tip of the iceberg with this stuff. And I don't know if you guys go on Instagram and see these like AI influencers and stuff. They're this close to being not, you can't tell anymore. I mean, so we're very close to having AI actors, which I'm sure is going to be, a problem for actors. And it's going to change their industry. And I want to get to the film questions. That's interesting, but I also just want to say, interesting thing about AI is if I go on there and I type in a boxer with a bloody nose, it won't let me make it. It doesn't let you use the word blood, nude, breast. There are different versions of AI. There's a thing called Stable Diffusion that is open source and is open to that. But Midjourney, which I use, and Wall-E, or DALL-E, which a lot of people use, is heavily censored now, which is interesting. In some ways, it's good in that it allows you to not have to deal with the sort of crap that's going to come out there, but it is also, it's limiting. And one imagines at some point that the pornography industry is going to get a hold of this stuff, and for better or worse.
Sure, they haven't already.
But let me see. I'm not entirely sure I understand a way of bringing it back into film. Is it possible to have the person who asked that elaborate on that?
Robert, can you write in a little bit more about that question?
Because you can certainly create the visual effects of film, grain. You can, I mean, film is a physical medium. analog film, and I don't know that. So one thing that I haven't talked about is the output. So maybe that's what he means. Did you get any?
I'm not sure, waiting for him to reply. I mean, I could also see if you're using sort of a film image as a base plate, and then you're compositing that with an AI
Absolutely.
creative, right? I mean, that could be a great way to incorporate them together.
Yeah, you can, by the way, import pictures. You can run your photographs through AI with very weird effects. One of the things I'm not that interested in, though a lot of people are, is I don't use people with the AI because, I mean, I use the AI stuff where they've already made the person that doesn't have three eyes coming out of their nose. But a lot of the people are really interested in the kind of freak stuff that you get. I think that the fascination with that will end at some point, although
Maybe.
certainly surrealism is definitely a big part of this world.
Robert didn't reply again.
Okay.
He's asking, can I play with 35mm scans and fuse them together into the process? I guess we kind of did answer that already. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Robert, thanks for filling us in on that.
In fact, that's what I did with the biosphere stuff that I showed. Those were from 35mm slides that I had then, used as a kind of starting point. Nancy asked me the other day about output, because you can pay to get high resolution, but not really high resolution. And I don't even think about printing these things. I will eventually. But I think that at the same time that AI is coming into being, I think we're going to start seeing increasing development of electronic inks and screen-based display modes that aren't using projected light. In other words, you'll have a thin screen that's basically a piece of paper, but it's an electric screen that is wirelessly connected to the internet, where you can display these things large, but it's not backlit. That makes sense. So I think that, the output in, most pictures that we see right now in the world aren't ever printed, of course. And I think that this might be the first kind of way of making pictures where print output is secondary, it's not made for print output.
Interesting idea. I mean, I think, just to back that up, you're right. We are inundated with images every day, right? As a world population, and it is all seen on screen. So why wouldn't that be the next way for work like this to start being shown? Right?
It already is. Most of the stuff you see on Instagram, it's interesting. It's a square format. You can, by the way, easily modify that. You can just put an aspect ratio, and then type in numbers and it will make a different ratio, but it defaults to square, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Huh. I'm going to encourage our viewers to send in some more questions, please. This is a great, interesting topic, good opportunity to talk with Oliver here and get his insight into kind of where we're moving into the future, which is, I feel like, a lot of what we're talking about. And what
there's no way to find out how many people out there have played with AI, is there? I guess you can't get a. Well, I'm just looking at you. I'm not saying no.
Yeah, if you have listeners, if you have tried it at all, played around with it, just type in a I have or yes I have or something like that into the Q&A, so we can just get a quick count of that. So Catherine is saying she tried AI and found it really takes a lot of patience. So to your point, of go through lots of versions.
Yeah.
Right. Anyone else out there have an experience with it?
The reason I ask is because I get, for everybody who seems excited about AI, photographers, there's 10 who really hate it. It's Photoshop got a lot of pushback, but it wasn't, and continues to, strangely, but it wasn't as much. AI is really like, I think people have a lot of problems with it, and I obviously sort of, as I said, came out defensively, so maybe people are reluctant to voice them, but I think there's legitimate complaints and problems with it too. And I'm always curious if we're, what people, if people have used it, and if their gut tells them they don't like it, or.
Well, I think to your point, changing and emerging technologies take time also, right? So yeah, maybe at the start, like you said, at the start of Photoshop, there were so many things you couldn't do, right?
Right.
Photoshop started without layers. And for those of you who don't know Photoshop at all, layers are a hugely essential part of working in Photoshop now. But we did what we could then, right? And you just continue to change and grow with it. And each time there's a new set of tools or parameters added, it makes your creative process that much easier, potentially, and smoother. And it gives you more to arsenal in your tool belt. Right? So a couple other comments here. Robert also, who answered before, said he has no experience yet, very interested and a little scared, which I think is a great
answer. I mean, look, there is working with analog photography or even Photoshop. I mean, there are certain things that are great, which we all love, capturing that decisive moment is great. Using the photograph as a way of sort of, its tie to reality is really great. And I don't deny that. It's not going to supplant that or replace it. So it is sort of, that's why I sort of talked about it in relation to my interest, because it is the thing I've been waiting for. I definitely get it. For a lot of people, it would just be like, hey, I'm interested in documenting the world. I'm interested in telling stories of things that exist. And, as long as they go into that knowing that the photograph is still, a fictional construct, it's not as extreme as AI. I can certainly see people having no interest in it at all.
That's okay. Sure.
I'm curious, Nancy, as somebody who kind of pioneered a lot of this morphing stuff, and I'm curious what are you?
Oh, I'm really excited to use it. I really am. And I have a few ideas. So I think what I did want to say though is the fake people is, I mean, this was never anything that I ever thought would happen down the line. I just never imagined that there would be fake faces that would be real enough for to use as sales tools. And I mean, that to me is just, it's still kind of a shock when I think about it. I mean, Snapchat, yeah, I could see that. But
and it's not just faces. I mean, I've been looking at some of the video that's been coming out now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost there.
And I also, I can see the movie industry really using it for these things that are called beauty passes. Have you ever heard of beauty passes? Yeah, beauty passes are done on the biggest stars. The biggest stars require them to look like really beautiful at all times. So if there's a major star and they don't like the way that they look in a scene, they will redo it digitally, frame by frame. So I think that will definitely be AI run at some point, if it isn't.
That Scorsese movie that came out where they sort of made, them look younger and stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't actually think it was quite ready yet.
I mean, they've been doing that, as far as I know, for at least the last 5 years, I think.
Yeah. And again, when you think we're just at the beginning of it, it's like,
right.
Right. I mean, I think we can say that, Hollywood has successfully been using AI or green screen technology to create backgrounds and settings and scenes. And we're now moving into a place where perhaps we're getting very close to being able to do that with people. Right? I mean, if you think even 10 years ago, Sin City or the 300 or, those earlier movies that were all completely shot on green screen, and the settings and the backgrounds, I mean, it was pretty incredible. Right? The color palettes there were pretty amazing too. So it's definitely a work in progress and, changing as we move.
And Oliver, I also wanted to say that you really had me at Jimi Hendrix as
Oh, I'm sorry, I
Rodin's
didn't.
thinker.
I'm sorry I didn't throw that in there. I actually was looking for it. I couldn't find it. Yeah, like the first things I did in some ways were the funnest. I don't know if like there used to be an app before Photoshop came out called Goo that came out like around 1990 or something, where you could just take someone's face. It was basically the liquefy filter and just smush it and stuff. It was like that was really fun. It's what everyone did. And it's the same with AI. The first thing you want to do is like, combine. In my case, I did Jimi Hendrix as a Rodin's The Thinker, and it gave me something like really kind of great. Like I thought that was just sort of an amazing.
Oh, it's wonderful. It is on your Instagram though. I have
Yeah.
seen it on your Instagram.
Yeah. No, I was tempted to go down that road, and I just decided. I tried to replicate it and couldn't, so I just decided, all right.
Wow. Okay.
Right, so I'm going to actually appeal to our listeners again. Please send in some more questions. We do need to wrap up in just a minute or so. So if you've got more questions, now is the time. Let's bring them out, please.
And just to say, this has been absolutely wonderful. Oliver, thank you so
Thanks.
much.
It was fun to do. I'm looking at something here. What is that? Somebody wrote, could we see the before and after AI process? Tarun Kumar. I'm curious what that means. You guys not see that? Is that only to?
Yeah, no, I see it too. I didn't ask that question because I kind of felt like you described the before part, which is you're just typing in words. You come up with an idea. You write in what you'd like the AI to generate for you, right? So,
yeah, I mean, well, there is a before and after when you input your own photographs, but maybe I wasn't clear about that. You were really generally you're going to the program and you're looking at all these other people working on it in many, many different rooms. All these images are flashing by you, and you're there is no before. You type in a description of this, of what you want to see, and then a bunch of aesthetic technical parameters. You can put in wide angle lens, I mean, you saw with some of the things I showed. There's really, it's its own language, and there's whole groups where you can go into them and learn sort of the kind of language that you use to describe the aesthetic that you want. And I imagine at some point there'll be, there already are sort of groups of people who work with photographic looking work, groups that work with, more painterly stuff and so forth.
Great. We do have more questions in here.
Okay.
So Sankit is asking, I'll just read it. It's a little hard to paraphrase. So with editing images, there's always a difference of opinion with a majority of the crowd being pro-editing, while some choose to disagree and think that images should not be retouched. Do you ever face any such difference of opinion with AI?
I mean, it's a really good question, because obviously I am all about editing. For me, as I said, for me and for the sort of generation of artists, associated that I sort of came up with, you could almost say that the picture started after it was made, after it was taken. So I've always been about post-production, but for some people it doesn't aesthetically interest them, and as I said before, that's great, but it also is ethically really complicated and problematic. And these are conversations we've been having with Photoshop. For journalists, this is obviously, a complicated issue. And if AI allows you to create a video that shows very clearly somebody tampering with a ballot box or a voting machine who never actually, messed with that voting machine, you know that there's going to be people that are going to jump on that video and want to use it, who are going to actually create it. I mean, so I mean, it's in some, the way I see it is it's going to be up to us to stop believing stuff, because you can't. I mean, they will find ways to, you know, there will be, through encryption and encoding, there will be ways to determine if a picture has been messed with. But I mean, journalists have been wrestling with this for the last 30 years with Photoshop, 25, 30 years. They're awarding, and the art world is just now starting to deal with it in some ways too, and that somebody just won a prize in the art fair for the best photograph, and it was, the New York Times jumped all over it because, it went viral, that article. But so to answer your question, I have no problem with it, obviously, but I recognize it as being a problem.
Great answer. And we have another question from Robert, which I think is a great question to sort of end our conversation with, which is, when you were young in New York, did you have any idea AI would be a thing in today's world?
I go back to Wisconsin. I assume Robert is from Wisconsin, maybe. I go back to Wisconsin once a year for Thanksgiving, and I will be going again this year. It's a great question in that I think it would, I don't know that I could have envisioned it as it exists now, but I mentioned earlier Blade Runner, which I was really fascinated with as a kid. Many artists of my generation were, and a really popular kind of critical voice back in the 80s was this guy Baudrillard, who proposed the idea that we are entering a period where the photograph is more real than reality itself. Basically, the simulation of something is the truth. And that's why in the very beginning, when Nancy, mentioned that I was interested in this idea of questioning the photograph's truth, I think we're at a point right now where maybe the photograph is the truth and reality isn't, and we're just at the tip of the iceberg with this meta stuff and everything. So I don't know that I envisioned AI, which is so based on the interconnectedness of the internet and these algorithms, but I definitely envisioned a world where images and reality were complicated, and where the image became more real to us in some ways than reality, or as real, in celebrity culture. And in the early 80s, Reagan had just been elected president. And so you got this feeling that something different was happening when a movie star gets elected president, and now we got a reality TV show host. So on that happy note, don't forget to vote.
Yeah. All right, Oliver, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is great. I love seeing the breadth of work that you showed us and the conversation. And viewers, thank you for your questions. Really intelligent stuff coming forward. And hopefully we'll see you again. Love to do this again.
It was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Bye, guys.